Hello, everyone. My name is Father Peter John Cameron. I'm a Dominican priest, and I'm very honored to have this wonderful opportunity to present to you two extremely exceptional human beings who are my friends. Priscilla La Porte is a guidance counselor at a high school committed to educating and transforming students into young women of competence, compassion, and commitment in a Catholic Felician Franciscan tradition of leadership and service. She received a BS in Human Development and Family Studies from the University of Delaware and an MA in Counseling from Montclair State University. And I want to tell you about the day I met Priscilla. So a dear friend of mine is Justin Fatica, who is another exceptional young man who heads up a ministry to young people throughout the country called Hard as Nails. And he was having a day-long retreat, and he asked me if I would go and give a couple of talks at the retreat. So I said, sure. So we're there, and we're sitting at the table, and across from me at the table is this beautiful, young, very quiet young woman. And I had no idea who she was. And when Justin said that now we are going to have a witness, and that the witness was going to be delivered by Priscilla, I realized that it was this young woman who was going to speak, and I wondered what she was going to say. And then I nearly fell off my chair, because Priscilla told us that she was the sister of Air Force Cadet Matthew Joseph La Porte, the 20-year-old Air Force cadet who was murdered on April 16, 2007, in the Virginia Tech shooting that claimed the lives of 32 students. And I was particularly struck because almost immediately in her talk, Priscilla began to make reference to the Sandy Hook school shooting, which had happened just 6 months before. And that was the place, St. Rose of Lima, where I had been helping out on Sundays. So this was a bit of an open wound for me. And I was amazed that Priscilla would have them in mind as she began to talk to us about her own experience. And then this astonishing young woman also spoke about her mother, Barbara, who was here with her husband, Joe, and how meditating on God as merciful was one of the only things that helped her family get through their suffering. And I wrote down one of the things, well, I wrote down a lot of things that Priscilla said, but I want to tell you one because I want her to tell you the rest. She said this with an exquisite simplicity and authority. She said, "I know real pain." And then she said, "I hope that everyone can see God is merciful. He really is there to carry you through. He's there for you." Joshua Stancil, after serving an 18-year sentence, is currently a candidate for a BA degree in English at Arizona State University. Last night he was taking his Italian exam. His writings have appeared in Magnificat and the monthly magazine of Communion Liberation Traces, and both Joshua and Priscilla have written pieces in the Magnificat Year of Mercy Companion. I first met Joshua in November of 2007 when I visited him in the prison in North Carolina. A friend of mine in the movement, Communion Liberation, who lives in North Carolina, his name is Rob Jones, helped me to arrange the visit. In an email he sent to me in August of 2007, Rob wrote, "I assure you that after you meet Joshua, you won't be able to stay away from him. He said, he is like a magnet." Rob volunteered to drive me from the airport to the prison and back again. And as we were pulling onto the prison property, Rob gave me some excellent advice. He said, "Listen carefully to everything that Joshua says, pay attention to everything, Try to remember it all, and when you come out, as soon as you can after you finish the visit, write it all down. I could tell from the seriousness in his voice that this was something that I really needed to do, so I did. And here is the paper. And immediately after this event, it goes right back in the vault. This is what I wrote down. That the sergeant who admitted me into the visiting room had blonde hair and said that Joshua was a good inmate. The room was big with yellow cinder block walls. There were yellow and green stacked plastic chairs around the room. The temperature in the room was about 80 degrees. Joshua's first words were words of thankfulness. He told me that he had learned to overcome skepticism by thinking about Josephine Bakita, the Sudanese-born saint who had been abducted as a youth, sold into slavery, tortured, and then finally was ransomed by Christian people who helped change her life and enabled her to find her vocation as a religious sister. He told me that he loved Carthusian monks. He told me that the prison guards regularly would open the inmates' mail and read it before passing it on to the inmates. And he told me that the prison guards thought that the movement Communion and Liberation was a political terrorist plot. And he asked me to contact his mother, which I did. And Rob Jones was right. Joshua Stancil is like a magnet, and now you can find out for yourself. Joshua.
Prepare to be underwhelmed. I had no idea he wrote all that down. I can't believe I'm here. I'm sharing a hotel room with a friend of mine named Brian, who is in prison with me. And last night we had received a visit from a friend of ours, Michelle, who stopped by to say hi, and then she left. And Brian and I just sat on our beds looking at each other for a minute, and finally we just said, how strange is our life? You know, how beautiful. You know, we shared a cell block, now we're sharing a hotel at the New York Encounter. How did we get to the New York Encounter? You know? And I had the same sensation a month ago. I was in Italy, and through a bizarre series of coincidences, I was able to attend Mass with Pope Francis at St. Peter's Basilica. And it was the only time during the month there that I really got sort of overwhelmed with emotion. Otherwise, I was overwhelmed with exhaustion for most of the trip, but because I thought, how did I get here? You know, what series of steps did it take for me to get here? And I thought about that last night. Brian and I were in the room talking, and just how strange and how beautiful life is. Well, this is basically how I got here. In 1996, I was arrested and eventually sentenced to 18 to 22 years in prison. When you're sentenced to prison, particularly if it's a long time, you cope the best way you can. And for me, the way I did it was just simply to go into denial. The law I had broken, it was a new statute. It had only been on the books for 9 months when I was arrested. And I'd read some newspaper articles about the law, and it had been somewhat controversial, the severity of the punishment imposed. And so I convinced myself, against any and all evidence, that the legislature was going to they were going to revisit this law, revise this law. My sentence would be revised, and I would go home. I just wasn't going to do 18 years in prison. After about 6 years, reality came crashing down that yes, in fact, I was going to do 18 years. Compounding the problem was the fact that North Carolina moves you around from prison to prison every 3 or 4 years because they're worried about relationships developing between inmates and staff. They don't want you bringing an inmate a cell phone or drugs, or there's the potential for romantic relationships. So I got sent to this really heinous prison that was very violent and chaotic. And although I was very fortunate, nothing ever happened to me, it was just living in that environment day in, day out, and the realization finally that I was going to be there in prison for at least another 12 years, I just became despondent. And the only thing that had kind of kept me afloat were some writings that I had found of Father Giussani that I'd found in Magnificat. And just a brief story about how I acquired my first Magnificat. It was December of 2000, and I think I discovered earlier he'd only been there about 2 years. They sent out some free sample issues. They were 2-week sample issues. And I was very captivated by it, but I couldn't afford it. So I made $1 a day. So I wrote him a letter and explained the situation. I'm an inmate, and can I order these on a monthly basis, like an issue per issue basis? So he wrote back, said, don't worry about it. I'll send it to you free for a year. He wound up sending it to me free for about 6 years. But
don't get any ideas. So I quickly gravitated to, and if you're not familiar with Magnificat, it's really, if after an issue, you'll just find it indispensable. Free plug. And they have a meditation for each day written by a saint or prominent person in the church. And I quickly gravitated to these little excerpts from the writings of Father Luigi Giussani. I had no idea who this man was. The little bio at the bottom of the page said he was a priest in Milan, and that he was the founder of the ecclesial movement, Communion and Liberation. Well, I didn't care about communion and liberation because I believed myself very macho at the time and independent. I didn't need friends. And also my idea of freedom at the time was an absence of ties, complete detachment from anyone and anything. And so I didn't care about that, but I was very curious about him, and I'd wanted to know if he had any books in English. So I began writing different prison ministries and different Catholic organizations asking, do you know who this guy is? Does he have any books in English, and how can I order some books? Well, when you're in prison and you write letters to people and organizations, frequently they just don't write back because they think you're out for money or you're trying to work some sort of scam. So most of the people just didn't respond. I heard back from a couple of organizations who said, we don't know who he is, sorry, can't help you. And so I kind of forgot about it. So by the summer of 2002, I'd been locked for about 6 years. I'm at this horrible prison, and reality, like I said, came crashing down, and I became, frankly, suicidal. North Carolina has 3 different custody levels in their prisons: close custody, medium, and minimum. When you're in close custody, you have your own cell. It's very restricted. There's no privacy. Committing suicide is a very difficult thing. It's a relatively easy thing in close custody because you have your own cell. Things are more secluded. Officers only make one circuit around the block, maybe an hour. But I was in medium custody at a prison where the room was open like this, and you've got 50 bunks in there, and the showers are open, and the bathrooms are open. Everything's open. So I didn't really know what to do. Well, I was going through my belongings one day in my locker, and I'd found this 4-week preparation to make an act of consecration to the Virgin Mary. It had been written by St. Maximilian Kolbe, who had been my confirmation saint. And it was a month away from the Feast of the Assumption, and I thought, okay, I'll do this. So I did. On the Feast of the Assumption in 2002, I made this act of consecration. And I felt nothing. I mean, there was no sense of catharsis or relief. There was no emotion. There was no joy, no happiness. It was just a complete act of desperation. I was numb. Then about 2 weeks later, I get this letter in the mail from a prison ministry who is responding to an earlier letter of mine about Father Giussani. They said, we don't know who this guy is or anything about this movement, but we found 3 email addresses for you, 3 contact email addresses. And there were the names of 3 people: John McCarthy, Barry Stolman, and Rick Kushner. Well, although I was happy about this on the one hand, on the other hand, in North Carolina, if you're in prison, you don't have access to the internet. So I thought, well, a fat lot of good this does me. But I thought, okay, well, here's what I'll do. I'll just pick a name, I'll write a letter, send it to my mom. She can email it for me. So I just sort of eeny, meeny, miny, moed it. It's like, and I settled on Rick Kushner. I thought, what? That's a nice Jewish name. Yeah, So it really was a completely random thing. And
So I wrote this little letter, sent it to my mom, and quickly forgot about it because I love my mom. But, asking her to do something like this is like rolling the dice. It's just, it may happen, it may not. She'll be very enthusiastic and, oh, yes, and then she'll kind of forget about it. So I forgot about it. Well, I found out much later, she did send the email. And she's not Catholic, so the date would not have been significant for her, but she emailed it on October 7th, 2002. October 7th is a feast of Mary, the Feast of the Rosary. So I don't know that she has sent this email. Rick receives the email. He contacts a woman named Elisabetta, who together with him put together this big box of stuff for me, some books by Father Giussani, some issues of Traces, which is a magazine of communion and liberation. Unfortunately, they also included some musical CDs, which the prison system in North Carolina does not allow. If you're an inmate, you can't have music CDs. So the prison rejected this box. I don't know anything about this. I don't know my mother has sent the email. I don't know that Rick has got it. I don't know they put the box together. I don't know the prison has rejected it. I'm completely in the dark. Then I get this letter from a guy in Italy named Giorgio Vittadini. It's not every day an inmate in a podunk prison in North Carolina gets a letter from a guy in Italy. I have no idea why he's writing me. And I don't really want to write back. One, I don't know what to say. Two, again, I was very macho, independent. I don't want any contact. But unfortunately, I'm from the South, and we're very polite. And so I thought I have to respond, But I didn't know what to write about. Well, I was watching the news, and CBS Evening News, and I saw that Mount Etna was erupting. And I thought, well, okay, there's something. So and demonstrating a deep, profound, and embarrassing ignorance of Italian geography, I told Giorgio to please be careful about the eruption of Mount Etna. Not realizing he's only 3,000 miles away from the volcano. So a couple of weeks later, now it's November of 2002, and unexpectedly, I'm transferred again to a much, much better prison. I mean, it's still prison, but it was a much, much better prison. And I get this letter from Elisabetta. She explains the whole thing that happened with the box and the rejection of it. And then she said, hey, would you mind if me and a friend come down to visit you? And again, my instinct is to say, well, no, I just want a book. I don't want problems. It doesn't have to be free. I'll pay you for it. I don't. In fact, I'm here today at the New York Encounter because I just wanted a book. That's really what this is about, So, So I wanted to say no, I don't want to visit, but I'm from the South, and so we have to be very polite. So I said yes. So on December 29th, 2002, Elisabetta Seratoni and Tobias Hoffman, who was here today, I just saw him before I came out, came down to visit me. Now, keep in mind, they're in Maryland, and I'm in North Carolina. It's a one-way drive of about 7 hours or so for them to visit me. I have no idea why. They want to come visit. I'm just assuming there's some pious Catholics on a feel-good tour of southern prisons. They're doing corporal works of mercy, and storing up crowns in heaven or something. So, but we had a really beautiful visit. I thought, and I realized much later that on that day, I'll never forget that date, because on that date my life began to change. I didn't know it at the time, and it didn't change overnight. But when they left, I thought, well, it was great, but I'll never see him again. And 5 weeks later, Teresa and Mary Ellen came to visit. A month after that, Rick Kushner finally came down to visit. And then a month after that, Rob Jones, who he was talking about. And it was just every month it was someone new. And it got to the point where so many people were visiting, I was receiving a visit every weekend. And after 4 or 5 months of this, I became very resistant. I didn't tell anyone, but I became very resistant to it for a couple of reasons. One, there's the whole guilt issue. I'm in prison, and like Peter said to Jesus, Lord, get away from me. I'm a sinful man. So there was that element, and there was also the element of I'd kind of been raised to believe good things don't last And so why entangle yourself with people and if it's not going to last? And I thought, I'm getting a visit every weekend from people who are traveling hundreds of miles to visit me. I have at least 11 years left. They're not going to continue to do this. This is going to end at some point. Why not just cut the cord now? We'll all be much better off in the long run. And but I didn't, because I could recognize there was something in me that was changing, that was different, and this was something that I really needed. Even if I wanted to live with this illusion of being macho and independent and whatnot, there was something about me that really needed this. So the theme of this year's New York Encounter, about longing for the shore and yet not afraid, although originally in the poem it says longing for the shore and yet afraid, that was me at the time. I was longing for that shore, but I was very afraid that it just wouldn't last, So I didn't say anything. And after about a year, Rick Kushner and his wife Kiata came down to visit, and she was pregnant, very pregnant. She was due to give birth, I think, maybe a couple of weeks, and they shocked me by asking me to be their child's godfather. And I was stunned, and I looked at them and I said, "You're aware I'm in prison, right?" Okay. This is not the way to win friends and influence people. People are going to think you're crazy. And I said, this is what we want to do. And so they did. And Gabriella was born, a few weeks later, and my parents attended her baptism because I could not. And then they brought her to me 4 or 5 months later. She's this little bundle of golden goodness, and I'm just I get to hold her there in the prison visitation room. And she repeatedly, she continued to visit me, during the rest of my sentence, Then I got another letter from Italy. This one was not from Giorgio Vittadini. This was from Father Giussani himself. And it was very brief. It was just a couple of lines long. It was less than 2 years before his death. He was in very, very bad health. And I was very moved by this letter, even though it was very brief, because at one point in the letter, he made reference to our faith. He said, nostra fede, and he had underlined the word nostra, our. And I realized that he was associating himself with me in some way, which is an unusual sensation for an inmate to have, because most people don't want to associate themselves with you, which is understandable, I suppose. But I thought, he and I are extremely different. He's Italian, I'm American. He's elderly, I was young. He's not in prison, I'm in prison. We're separated by thousands of miles. But yet we shared this one experience, And I remember one of the first things I read by him was about verifying the church's claims for itself. That he was going over different ways to verify the church's claims, and one of them that's used by certain religious groups is this idea of an inner enlightenment, that you have this overwhelming sensation, this feeling of forgiveness. And the problem with this is, how do you know it's not just a trick of the mind? And what if your certainty, if your faith is based on a feeling, what happens when that feeling goes? Feelings come and go, they rise and fall like an ocean tide. So how can you be sure? Well, when you're sitting in a prison visitation room and a married couple asks you to be the godfather of their daughter, then you can be sure, because now love has become flesh. Mercy has taken on human flesh. It's become incarnate. And last night, if you weren't here, if you missed the talk with Greg Wolf and Christian Wyman was talking about how he needed, for many, many years he would talk about God sort of abstractly, God. But at a certain point, he needed something concrete, And I realized that was the same thing with me, that it's one thing to read in the Bible that you're forgiven, that mercy exists. It's another thing when you're experiencing it, and that mercy comes to you through people with names, and Elisabetta and Tobias and Teresa and Mary Ellen, Michelle and Sarah and Joe and Simonetta and Gabrielle, and I could go on and on. Father Peter used to visit me. He came to visit me, and at that point that mercy exists. And on the topic of mercy, because I think I'm probably getting long-winded here, when I was in Italy, I was talking about the year of mercy. And I've been aware, looking online, that there are some Catholics for whom Pope Francis is kind of a controversial figure, which is fine, I suppose. Not every pope can be popular with everyone. But what kind of irks me about some of the criticism is that they even criticize this Jubilee Year of Mercy that he's proclaimed. And their rationale is that Francis talks too much about mercy and not enough about repentance. And I thought, well, you're not really understanding what mercy is. And I'm no moral theologian, I'm not an expert, but it seems to me if the mercy I receive is contingent upon a certain amount of repentance on my part, then I'm in effect earning that mercy, which contradicts the very definition of mercy. Mercy always has to come first. And the example that I used in Italy was the woman caught in adultery. That 2,000 years ago, adultery was not merely a moral failing, it was a criminal offense, and you could be executed for it if you were a woman. The men got a pass, apparently, but she was going to be executed, and so she's thrown at the feet of Christ. And one of the most striking things about that whole passage to me is that Jesus never one time calls her an adulterer. And he never throws her sin back in her face. He never tries to humiliate her about what she's done, because she doesn't need to be humiliated. He just knows that she needs to be able to start again. And so that's what he lets her do. And I think that's because mercy always comes first. Romano Guardini once wrote that justice gives structure and order to things, but mercy creates. And so I think that's one of the points of the Year of Mercy. A woman came up to me after one of the talks in Italy, and she said, I don't think Jesus can be merciful to me, or wouldn't be, I don't think he can be merciful to me because I'm like a volcano that just continually erupts. If he's merciful to me today, then I'm going to waste it because I'm going to erupt again tomorrow. I'm this volcano that just continually erupts. And I said, well, yeah, but because we have, volcanoes gave us Hawaii, And out of all that fire and chaos and violence and tumult, we have one of the most beautiful places on earth, that Christ can use anything. And so there really are no objections to mercy except our own. Pope Francis provocatively makes reference to Christ's caress of mercy on our sins. And that's been my experience. And I realize that the only objection that can be raised is a false one that I come up with. Luckily, I had people that wouldn't let me do that.
Thank you, Jeff. Priscilla La Porte.
Good afternoon. I used to think that being a Christian meant your life was perfect and everything was all together. And I thought it was God's way of saying thank you for deciding to follow me. I had a good life. I had a good education. I had friends, I had everything that I needed, and I was very happy. I had a good relationship with my brother most of the time. He was 2 years older than me, so sometimes he annoyed me or he picked on me. That's what brothers do. But I looked up to him and I loved him. And when I was in high school, he started at college at Virginia Tech, and I was very proud of him because he had gotten an Air Force scholarship, and I knew he was happy and he was on his way to doing a lot of great things, and he was very excited to have a career in the military when he finished. And when I was a senior, in April, on the 16th in 2007, I woke up and it was pouring outside. And there was actually so much flooding that school was canceled. And we lost power, so I decided to go to my place of work, which was at a restaurant, because my boss had a generator, so she was very busy. So I went in, and there were TV screens there, and news was coming in that there was a shooting at Virginia Tech. And initially, it didn't bother me because I knew the school was very big, and it just wasn't something that happened in my life. My life was good. So I didn't even think, oh my gosh, I wonder if Matt's okay. As the day went on, the news didn't stop, and it was getting worse, and it wasn't just 10 people, it was 20 people, and then it was 30 people, and I was calling my mom, and I said, did you get in touch with Matt? And she hadn't, and I was trying to call him, and he wasn't picking up his phone, and it just kind of went on for the rest of the day like that, and I kept getting more and more nervous. When I spoke to my mom again, she told me that she spoke to my brother's roommate, and he said that the last time he saw Matt was in the morning when he left for class, and he was in the building where the shooting took place, and I just collapsed. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't let my mind go there, but it seemed to be going anyway to that place. So I left work, and I was yelling in the car at God, and I was saying, this can't be real, this can't be my life, don't let me find out that something happened to my brother. He has to be in the hospital, maybe he got shot in the foot, and that's why we haven't heard from him, or he's helping other people, because this just can't be real. And later that evening, we did find out that my brother had died that day, and I just remember hearing those words, I'm so sorry. And I really don't remember much after that. I don't know what that night was like. I don't remember. But months after, I remember feeling all that pain. And, graduation was coming up because I was a senior, prom was coming up. It was supposed to be a really happy time, and it was just an awful time. My friends' siblings were coming home from college, and mine wasn't. And it was the loneliest time of my life because my parents were going through something, and I couldn't help them. I couldn't reach out to them. They couldn't help me. We were all broken. My friends were there for me, although they hadn't experienced what I was going through, and I didn't know anyone who experienced what I was experiencing. Matt wasn't around, and I felt like God wasn't around, and it was the first time in my life that I just couldn't connect with him because this wasn't the way that I related to him. And I didn't want to be angry with him, and I didn't want to shut him out of my life, but it was too painful to approach him because I felt like he let this happen, and he said he was good and that he was gonna always be there for me, but how was he there for me? And how was he there for my brother? So I started praying the rosary because there was really nothing else for me to do. And I figured, Mary kind of went through the same things that I feel like I'm going through. She, I'm sure, was very hurt when she lost her son. And the rosary was structured. I didn't have to think. I could just say it. And it was the only time that I felt some little drop of hope. So I kept doing that. I kept praying the rosary. And I did it for the future, because there was no hope in that moment. But with the rosary, I felt like maybe one day I could get there. Because the pain was just too overwhelming. I mean, I felt like I was walking around without any arms or something. It was like I lost this huge part of who I was, and I could never get it back. And so through the rosary, Mary showed me her heart and what she went through and what Jesus went through, and she said, it's okay, you can trust Jesus and you can be happy again. And she helped me to see Jesus through her eyes and his mercy and his love. And I realized that God was carrying this cross with me. He didn't leave me, he was with me the whole time. So after, I don't know how long it was, it took a while, but I did start talking to God again, and my prayer became, God, please heal me, because I'm so unhappy. And I don't want to be a bitter person. I want to be a better person. And God was working through my life for a long time. It hurt for a long time. On some days it still hurts. But he was working behind the scenes for many years, and I didn't know it then. But on April 9th, 2015, my family and I got confirmation that my brother was going to, or he was being awarded that day for his heroism. He had helped to stop the shooter when he entered the classroom, and he was being awarded with the Airman's Medal from the United States Air Force. And there's about a 3-minute video that will take you back to that day.
Citation to accompany the award of the Airman's Medal to Matthew J. La Porte. Cadet Matthew J. La Porte distinguished himself by heroism involving voluntary risk of life in Norris Hall on the campus of Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University on 16 April 2007. On that day, gunfire erupted in the hallway outside of room 211, and the professor told her students to get down and to move to the back of the classroom to take cover behind desks. Cadet La Porte instead moved to the front of the class and barricaded the door with a large, heavy desk in an attempt to defend the class. When the shooter subsequently forced his way into the classroom, Cadet La Porte, with complete disregard for his own safety, unhesitatingly charged the shooter in an aggressive attempt to stop him, drawing heavy fire at close range and sustaining 7 gunshot wounds. Cadet La Porte's actions helped save lives by slowing down the shooter and by taking fire that would have been directed at his classmates. He sacrificed his own life in an attempt to save others. An exemplary courage and heroism displayed by Cadet La Porte in the dedication of service to his country reflects great credit upon himself and the United States Air Force.
So that ceremony took place in Blacksburg, Virginia, where my brother is buried. And we received the medal on his behalf. It's the highest medal that's awarded to someone in a non-combat setting, usually involving the risk of that person's life, although it does not have to be successful. And you can't really tell in the video, but that day was so beautiful. It was just, not just the weather, but just everything. It was so perfect. There were so many people there that came to support Matt and be there for him that we hadn't even seen, I don't know, for 10 years even. I mean, there were just so many people there. It was really like a foretaste of heaven. And it was one of the happiest days of my life, and people were saying, "I'm so sorry," and I was like, "Why are you sorry? I'm so happy." And I just remember standing there when everything was being read, and there was this light breeze and the sun was shining, and I just felt like God was saying, "How could you think that I would just abandon you and I wouldn't take something and make it better? Or why would you not trust me?" And I finally felt like God was just totally there again, like he was before my brother had passed. And that was 8 years later, and I don't know why it took 8 years in the grand scheme of things, but God's timing is perfect. I don't think my heart would have been ready to accept it anyway, or I might not have been happy. I don't know. But we have to trust always that God does things the way he does for a reason, and that he'll always make things better. And not just better, he doesn't just restore us, but he gives us a resurrection. We can talk to our friends, we can go to therapy, we can do all of these things that can be helpful for us when we're really hurting, but there's nothing like God and what he can do for you when you're in the depths of despair. There's no one that can take something so awful and horrible and have something so beautiful and wonderful come out of it. So I just always want you to remember that there's always a resurrection. Whatever you're facing in life, with God, it's going to be even better than it was before. And of course I miss Matt, and of course I wish he was here, but I have such an appreciation for life now, and I really know what it's about because of everything that's happened in my life. And without Matt and without God, I wouldn't know everything I know now. And the legacy that I'm left with and that I try to live by every day is on the back of my brother's prayer card, which I will leave you with. It's called The Legacy. I don't know who the author is. "When I die, give what is left of me to my brethren. If you need to cry, cry for your brothers walking beside you. Put your arms around anyone and give them what you need to give me. I want to leave you with something better than words or sounds. Look for me in the people that I have known and loved. And if you cannot live without me, then let me live on in your eyes, your mind, and your acts of kindness. You can love me most by letting hands touch hands and letting go of children that need to be free. Love does not die, people do. So when all that is left of me is love, give me away." Thank you.
We have a little bit of time left, so I'd like to ask a question or two of Joshua and of Priscilla. At lunchtime, we had a chance to be together, and we were talking about things. And in preparation for today, I was struck by something sort of odd about the presentation, which is we have two wildly different sorts of people on either end of the table who are speaking about the same thing. So, I mean, we have a person who was incarcerated, so he committed a crime. And when we think of prisoners, we often, they're sort of a symbol for our own tendency to do evil, to commit sins, etc. And that situation is so different from the situation of somebody plunged into a kind of grief that just can't be imagined. And, that person is if you want to use the word, is a kind of a victim. So there's no sort of moral quality to the reason why the person who is suffering this terrible grief, but the pain can't even be described. And yet, strangely, the antidote for both is the same thing. And Joshua's had some magnetic things to say about that. So I asked him if he would talk about it now.
I know we were sitting there having lunch, and I was listening to Priscilla's mom talk about her experience, and I was very struck by the fact that, because she kept saying, I had to let people be close to me because I realized that's what they needed to do. And the same thing had happened to me. And so I had mentioned to them that I was very struck by the fact that although we're on sort of opposite sides of, I had a victim, they in essence are victims, and but that I didn't know what to do with my guilt and they didn't know what to do with their grief, but the solution was the same for both, which was to allow people, and I would be a little more, I would say to allow Christ be close to you through people. And that there is some resistance to that, at least there was in me, as I mentioned earlier. But eventually that resistance was overcome. But I was just very struck by the fact that it's two very different situations, but the solution was the same. And for me, even the being accompanied even happens when I'm not looking for it, or even when I don't really want it. I just, like I mentioned, I just came back from Italy, and I knew the return flight to America was going to be packed. And it was. And I get to the plane, and I'm in seat 43G, which is all the way in the back on the aisle next to the bathroom. It's a 9-hour flight, and I thought, well, good luck getting any sleep. And but I thought, I just want to be alone and just, Well, long story short, I get down to my seat, and there's a woman in the middle seat, and she has her coat over what is to be my seat. And so I'm assuming she's Italian. Most of the people in the flight were. So I smiled, pointed to myself, and pointed to the seat. She smiled, picked her coat up. But she just kept staring at me. And when I finally sat down, she looked at me, and she said with this Italian accent, "You're Joshua." And I'm serious. And I didn't know what to say. It was surreal, and so I thought she must have been at one of the talks. And then, as if she was reading my mind, she said, "I wasn't at any of your talks, but I have a letter from you from a long time ago." And I said, "How do you have a letter from me from a long time ago?" And she said, "Well, I'm Lorna." Well, the name didn't ring a bell, and then she explained a little more that she had lived, and then I realized who she was. She used to live in New York City. We exchanged one letter apiece, then she moved back to Italy. But the oddness of her being on the same flight in the seat next to me, but it got even weirder because she wasn't even supposed to be on that flight. She had been bumped. Her flight was the day before, and she got bumped to my flight in the seat right next to me. So I didn't want to be accompanied in that moment, but I thought, well, this is Jesus telling me that he's accompanying me even in this moment. So we had a nice flight back. But again, I was just struck by very different situations, but the solution was the same, which was to be accompanied.
Yeah. I'm very moved by these days here, and I'm especially struck by the young people that are here. And I'm wondering, Priscilla, if you could say something to them, because you're a young person, I don't know if you knew that. And also, you work with young people. But I want to make a little confession before I tell you what I want to tell you. I'm so happy I didn't know your history before I met you, because I would have been terrified. And I really wanted to meet Barbara, your mom, and I was really terrified. Because how do you talk to a person who's not only lost a mother, who's lost a son, but lost a son in such a horrific way, you know? And I'm a believer. I'm a Catholic, actually. And so I do. I mean, I believe in faith, but I've never been through anything like that. Never been through anything like that, and it makes me very scared to come face to face with someone who has suffered that kind of horrific, that kind of an atrocity. And I have to confess to the same sort of terror walking into the prison the first time I went to see Joshua. Not because I was afraid of him, but just because, of the whole situation. But here's the thing. It is people like you and your mom and your father who, to me, are the greatest authorities on the planet. Because when you speak, you have an absolutely inviolable credibility, And it seems to me that only suffering can give that to a person. So, because sometimes, as we listen to that beautiful Edgar Lee Masters poem, especially young people, I think, are afflicted by the sense that there is no meaning to life. I do feel overwhelmed by suffering, and therefore the thing that I must do is do everything in my power to obliterate suffering from my life, to exterminate it. But it's impossible, obviously. No matter how hard we try, it keeps coming back. But even more importantly than that, as Christian Wyman said, we can't experience the joy of life without the experience of suffering. And in that respect, suffering itself is a kind of mercy. So I don't know, could you say something to the young people?
Well, if nature takes its course, we're going to be here for a number of decades, so we might as well make the best or the most of life. I mean, I could have very easily made the choice to just say I'm done and I'm gonna be miserable, because I would have every reason to do that, and just walk around and be bitter, because there are people like that. Because the only thing that makes them feel better is to know that other people are miserable. And I could have done that, but I knew that that wasn't the truth, or what was that really going to do? So when you're faced with incredible pain, there's no way of getting around to the fact that it's horrible and it stinks and you want to run away from it because it's awful. But you have to hold on to hope that those experiences are what's going to make you just a more beautiful person, because you've experienced so much. And that's also the stuff that the world needs to hear about. I mean, I don't like telling the story that I just told, but I do it because I know that it helps people. And that's more important than my comfort. So, I tell the kids that I work with at the high school, you can't give up. You have to share this with people. How many other kids would feel better and more accepted if they knew they weren't the only one? So you have to use it to make the world better. And what else is going to make the world better? Like, there's so much power behind that. So use it.
Are all the young women in your school aware of your story?
No, but I do share it when I feel like it will help them.
Can you tell us one story about that? You don't have to reveal names.
I don't know if it was anything extraordinary. Maybe it was for them, I don't know. But they're always really shocked and, oh my gosh, wow. And I think I'm a pretty smiley kind of person. You would never know what happened in my life. And I don't think the kids it's hard for them to believe. And so if they can see me genuinely happy and caring for them, then they know that whatever it is they're going through, they can get to the place that God has helped me get to.
Any last thoughts, Joshua? Before we let you take a nap.
Just one thing which touches on what she said, and about allowing suffering to run its course and to take its time. When I was in the county jail awaiting to be sentenced, I knew I was looking at it somewhere around 20 years, and my attorney came to me one night and he said, maybe, some good news, the prosecutor doesn't really care about your case that much, and there's a chance charges will be reduced and you'll just get a sentence of 5 years or less. And so I naturally started praying really hard for the 5 years or less, but didn't get that. I got the 18 to 22 years. So it would appear, if you don't look at it too closely, that I didn't get what I asked for, and that it was easy in that moment to feel that I'd been abandoned. But if I'd gotten what I had prayed for, if I'd gotten that 5 years, I wouldn't be here now because I met the movement in year 6. So I have a goddaughter because I got the 18-year sentence as opposed to the 5-year sentence. So on the one hand, my suffering might have been less if I'd gotten the 5-year sentence as opposed to the 18, but my life would be far less rich and far poorer. Just in terms of happiness. So suffering is a mystery, and but it does have a value. At least in my experience, it does.
Your suffering would have been less, but our suffering would have been more.
Okay, what? No, what?
So we want to thank you, Joshua and Priscilla, very much for your witnesses and for all you do to help us see the face of Christ.